Hello, seniors. So you finished taking your release test for the North Carolina final exam, and now we are going to review the first reading passage and its questions. So part A of the excerpt from After the Race. Hopefully you started with runners, in which you looked at the title. All right, so After the Race. So hopefully right now you're bringing to mind visions of NASCAR or car races where we've got folks driving and driving and driving and yet really never going anywhere, because that's going to be an important theme as we continue reading the story. All right, James Joyce is the author. He was a writer from Ireland who grew up in the early part of the 20th century, so the 1900s. He lived in Ireland as a boy, and then as an adult he moved out of Ireland and he lived in France, which is going to also come up in the story quite a bit, as well as Switzerland and other places in Europe. The cars came scudding in towards Dublin, running evenly like pellets in the groove of the Naas Road. At the crest of the hill at Inchicore, sightseers had gathered in clumps to watch the cars careening homeward. And through this channel of poverty and inaction, the continent sped its wealth and industry. Now and again the clumps of people raised the cheer of the gratefully oppressed. Their sympathy, however, was for the blue cars, the cars of their friends, the French. All right, there are a couple of phrases that I want and I hopefully stuck out to you as you were underlining keywords. All right, one of them was this channel of poverty and inaction. That lets us know that the setting of Dublin, Ireland, is going to be one where there are many poor people. It's contrasted with the French or France, who would be on the main continent of Europe, which is seen as a place of wealth and industry. Wealth and industry. Now, one question you might be asking is, why are the clumps of poor people in Dublin cheering the cheer of the gratefully oppressed, which is very ironic to me, because when I think of oppression, I'm not thinking of grateful people. I'm thinking of people who want to be independent. Anyway, that phrase is there, the gratefully oppressed. It says their sympathy, however, so that means the people that they're cheering for, are the blue cars who were driven by their friends, the French. All right, so let's take a look at this for a minute. All right, so Dublin is in Ireland, which is up here. And you know from world history that Ireland and the UK or England have had a very rocky relationship, as the UK was in control of Ireland and for many years nationalists wanted freedom. All right, it's our location for the book as well as this short story. We mentioned that about it being poor and that our spectators are cheering for the people from France, which is right here on the map. All right, France and England have traditionally been rivals and sometimes even enemies. So when the Irish people are actually angry at the UK, then they show this by cheering for their friends, the French. All right, and remember that the blue race cars are driven by French people, so they're the ones that the folks are cheering for when we begin our short story. The French, moreover, were virtual victors. Their team had finished solidly. They had been placed second and third, and the driver of the winning German car was reportedly a Belgian. Each blue car, therefore, received a double measure of welcome as it topped the crest of the hill, and each cheer of welcome was acknowledged with smiles and nods by those in the car. In one of these trimly built cars was a party of 4 young men whose spirit seemed to be at present well above the level of successful Gallicism. In fact, these 4 young men were almost hilarious. They were Charles Seguin, the owner of the car, André Rivière, a young electrician of Canadian birth, a huge Hungarian named Villanova, and a neatly groomed young man named Doyle. Seguin was in good humor because he had unexpectedly received some orders in advance. He was about to start a motor establishment in Paris. And Rivière was in good humor because he was about to be appointed manager of the establishment. These 2 young men, who were cousins, were also in good humor because of the success of the French cars. Villona was in good humor because he had had a very satisfactory luncheon, and besides, he was an optimist by nature. The 4th member of the party, however, was too excited to be genuinely happy. Let's take a peek for a minute at some important stuff from paragraph 2. All right, first of all, we have our actual race winner was a German car reportedly driven by a Belgian. This is the winner of the race mentioned in the title. But we have our virtual victors. because they were the ones that the spectators cheered so loudly for. And these are our French cars who place second and third. In one of these cars, we have our main characters, 4 of them: Charles Seguin, Andre Riviere, Villona, and Jimmy Doyle. All right, these 2 right here are both French. This guy is from Hungary, and this guy is our main character, who's our homeboy Irish Dubliner man, Jimmy, as he will be called during the story. Everybody else is going to be called by their last name. He will be referred to as Jimmy, but in this paragraph he was set up as Doyle. All right, one thing I want you to take a look at is anytime an author repeats a phrase, it's important. And it's going to show up important in your questions a little bit later on. All right, we see the phrase "in good humor." Seguin is in good humor. Riviere is in good humor. Villona is in good humor. The 4th guy, however, Shift, was too excited to be genuinely happy. Paragraph 3. He was about 26 years of age, we're talking about Jimmy Doyle here, with a soft light brown mustache and rather innocent-looking gray eyes. His father, who had begun life as an advanced nationalist, had modified his views early. He had made his money as a butcher in Kingstown, and by opening shops in Dublin and in the suburbs he had made his money many times over. He had also been fortunate enough to secure some of the police contracts, and in the end he had become rich enough to be alluded to in the Dublin newspapers as a merchant prince. He had sent his son to England to be educated in a big college, and had afterwards sent him to Dublin University to study law. Jimmy did not study very earnestly, and took to bad courses for a while. He had money, and he was popular, and he divided his time curiously between musical and motoring circles. Then he had been sent for a term to Cambridge to see a little life. His father, remonstrative, but covertly proud of the excess, had paid his bills and brought him home. It was at Cambridge that he had met Seguin. They were not much more than acquaintances as yet, but Jimmy found great pleasure in the society of one who had seen so much of the world, and was reputed to own some of the biggest hotels in France. Such a person, as his father agreed, was well worth knowing, even if he had not been the charming companion he was. Villona was entertaining also, a brilliant pianist, but, unfortunately, very poor. All right, so I got this slide about Jimmy Doyle's dad. All right, it's not necessarily important for the questions, but it is for you understanding what's going on in the context of this story. All right, so Jimmy Doyle's dad had begun life as an advanced nationalist, one of the people who wanted independence from England. But he modified his views early. Why? Because he's a chameleon. All right, so can you see from the picture, the chameleon starts off as green, he gets on top of the pink sunglasses, and look, the chameleon is changing his colors to match his surroundings. That's what Jimmy Doyle's dad did. He valued money above everything else, so he totally changed his political views that Ireland should be independent from England so that he could make a lot of money. And he did this by helping England. Police contracts, police, English, helpful to him to make money, not as helpful for his Irish nationalist former friends. And he also sent Jimmy to England for his education. Second thing from this paragraph we're seeing is the theme of paralysis. I mentioned it briefly when we talked about the title, about how race cars drive and drive and drive, yet they go nowhere. So, an example of paralysis. But then also, Jimmy Doyle is going to be an example of paralysis, and this is the first thing, his education. So he studied in England, he went to Dublin University to study law, but he didn't study very earnestly. He had money and he was popular. So in other words, Jimmy had these great opportunities for education, but he learned very little. And basically his only accomplishment mentioned was meeting Seguin. Alright, so again, with paralysis, a character has a desire, faces obstacles to it, and then ultimately relents and suddenly stops all action. So these moments of paralysis show the character's inability to change their lives and reverse the routines that hamper their wishes. We can have physical paralysis, which is probably what you've been used to when you've heard that word. And then we have this moral paralysis, which is linked to religion, politics, and culture. Moving on. The car ran on merrily with its cargo of hilarious youth. The 2 cousins, Seguin and Riviere, sat on the front seat. Jimmy and his Hungarian friend sat behind. Decidedly, Villona was in excellent spirits. He kept up a deep bass hum of melody for miles of the road. The Frenchmen flung their laughter and light words over their shoulders, and often Jimmy had to strain forward to catch the quick phrase. This was not altogether pleasant for him, as he had nearly always to make a deft guess at the meaning and shout back a suitable answer in the face of a high wind. Besides, Villona's humming would confuse anybody. The noise of the car, too. Rapid motion through space, or fast driving, elates one. So does notoriety. So does the possession of money. These were the three good reasons for Jimmy's excitement. He had been seen by many of his friends that day in the company of these Continentals. At the control, Seguin had presented him to one of the French competitors, and in answer to his confused murmur of compliment, the swarthy face of the driver had disclosed a line of shining white teeth. It was pleasant after that honor to return to the profane world of spectators amid nudges and significant looks. Then as to money, he really had a great sum under his control. Seguin perhaps would not think it a great sum, but Jimmy, who in spite of temporary errors was at heart the inheritor of solid instincts, knew well with what difficulty it had been got together. This knowledge had previously kept his bills within the limits of reasonable recklessness, and if he had been so conscious of the labor latent in money when there had been a question merely of some freak of the higher intelligence, how much more so now when he was about to stake the greater part of his substance? It was a serious thing for him. Outsiders. So we've got Seguin and Riviere, who were cousins, interested in the automotive business, to be owner and manager. They sit in the front of the car, they laugh and they talk together, and they sort of, but not really, include the other two. Now this didn't bother Villona. He may have been an outsider, but he didn't care. Notice that Doyle's kind of snarky here when he says, unfortunately, he was very poor. He's a brilliant pianist, and he had a deep bass hum for miles. But then we have Doyle, Jimmy Doyle. He wants to be part of the group, but he's in the back, and Dad is kind of buying his way to be included with the money. Of course, the investment was a good one, and Seguin had managed to give the impression that it was by favor of friendship that the mite of Irish money was to be included in the capital of the concern. Jimmy had a respect for his father's shrewdness in business matters, and in this case it had been his father who had first suggested the investment. Money to be made in the motor business. Pots of money. Moreover, Seguin had the unmistakable air of wealth. Jimmy set out to translate into day's work the lordly car in which he sat. How smoothly it ran, in what style they had come careening along the country roads. The journey laid a magical finger on the genuine pause of life, and gallantly the machinery of human nerve strove to answer the bounding courses of the swift blue animal. They drove down Dame Street. The street was busy with unusual traffic, loud with the horns of motorists and the gongs of impatient tram drivers. Near the bank, Seguin drew up, and Jimmy and his friend alighted. A little knot of people collected on the footpath to pay homage to the snorting motor. The party was to dine together that evening in Seguin's hotel, and meanwhile Jimmy and his friend who were staying with him were to go home to dress. The car steered out slowly for Grafton Street, while the two young men pushed their way through the knot of gazers. They walked northward with a curious feeling of disappointment in their exercise, while the city hung its pale globes of light above them in a haze of summer evening. All right, this is where the excerpt ends, all right, and it leaves you with this idea about money. Jimmy Doyle is consumed with appearances and money. There was that line that I read, rapid motion through space elates one. So does notoriety. So does the possession of money. So driving in a fast car excited him. People knowing him and thinking he was important excites him. And having lots of money excites him. All right. Again, he's a young guy. You know, the whole story is about adolescents and young adults. But he's got some priorities up in the wrong spot. And I think James Joyce is giving us this idea when he says, they walk north with a curious feeling of disappointment in the exercise. Appearances, money, doesn't make you happy. He doesn't put it in exactly those words, but we're left to read between the lines on that. All right, so we're putting a pause here. We're going to answer the questions in the next video, and then we'll come back to part B of the story after that.